I'm here today with Annick De Houwer, who is Professor of Language Development and Multilingualism at the University of Erfurt in Germany. And today we're going to talk about the topic of harmonious bilingual development. So welcome, Annick.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I'd like to start by asking you about some of the recent work you've done on language transmission across generations, so from parents to children, and what evidence you've uncovered that language is actually transmitted across generations.
Right, yes, well, I did a very large-scale survey in Belgium, actually, so with quite a few families, over 2,000 families who did not just speak the majority language at home, the majority language in this case being Dutch. And so we had a lot of families that also used a minority language at home, one of 73 or so at that time. And it was a very simple question, basically, like people were asked to list the languages that they use at home for all the family members. So this allowed me to look at what the parents were using at home and what the children were using at home. And it was a real surprise because up until then there were no studies of this anywhere, really, on a family level that indicated to what extent parents were successful in transmitting their language to their children. And I found out that only 3/4 of children who heard a minority language at home actually spoke that minority language to their parents.
So there's a quarter of children that didn't.
Exactly. 1/4 of children who hear a language other than the majority language at home, day after day, do not speak it. So that means they do speak to their parents, but they speak in the majority language, and then the minority language parent may speak the minority language back to them.
So these were children like bilingual first language acquisition cases where both languages were spoken in the home.
Well, actually, we had in that whole study, there was a mix of parents and families. So there was a mix of families where both languages were being spoken in the home. So those were the bilingual first language acquisition families. And then there were also families where there was only the minority language being spoken at home, so that's the early second language acquisition families. And I also found that there is a big, well, actually that's an analysis I did just recently, that there is a big difference in the transmission rate of the minority language in those two kinds of families, where in the families where children are hearing two languages at home, so the BFLA families, there's 30% of families where the kids only speak the majority language. And then you have the ESLA families. So that's the families where the parents only speak a minority language at home. You have only 3% of those kids that do not speak that minority language at home.
Really
so that's a
difference.
huge difference.
And what would you say is that, what makes the difference, what drives this difference, would you say?
Well, I think there are probably various reasons, but first off, the very fact that in an ESLA family, so for the minority language, in an ESLA family, children will hear both language speaking just the minority language, and they will also hear their parents speak the minority language to each other, so they will overhear it. That probably raises the frequency, the quantity of input in those two languages for the children. And we know that quantity of input is really important for children's language development. Plus, in addition, many of these parents may not yet understand the majority language themselves if they are newly immigrated. So the children do not have the option of using the majority language that they are learning in school. They do not have the options to use that with their parents, because then their parents would just simply not understand them. And that is an important aspect of the BFLA families, where often in a bilingual family, so where the family uses two languages at home, you will have at least one parent who actually knows two languages. So who will be able to understand the majority language, so the children have the option of speaking that language and still be understood.
Exactly. So reassuringly, though, all of the children sort of they grow up in either languages or two languages are spoken, or in the minority language, end up acquiring the majority language.
Absolutely,
right?
and I think this is a worldwide finding. Any study there has looked
Exactly.
at that.
And so, what are the pressures, would you say, on parents in keeping the minority language, but also making sure that clearly children acquire the majority language, which is so important for school success, academic achievement, and all that?
Yeah, so what are the pressures on minority language families? Well, they give themselves pressures. They give themselves pressures in the sense that they want their children to know their own language, and I think anybody would agree that that's important for everybody, to have the right and the possibility to transmit your own language to your own children. At the same time, because of the situation they're in, parents know that it's important for their children to learn the majority language, so they are in a bit of a bind. And many parents manage to beautifully work with this and find an equilibrium, but then there are many who do not. For various reasons, they may have certain ideas about their minority language not being worth so much, and they may not be they may feel insecure. They may have ideas about how children learn language that are not really conducive to children learning languages. So they may think it's important for their children to know the minority language, but they don't realize that it is important to speak to children a lot. They don't realize it's important then to make sure, or to try to make sure, that children speak back the language to them that they speak to their children, and they may not be aware of certain techniques that one could use there. But
yeah. So what are the socio-affective implications of not speaking the home language, the minority language, to the children from the parents' point of view?
From the parents' point of view, I think parents may often feel rejected by their children. The very fact that you're not speaking the same language in a conversation with somebody in the private sphere often creates a distance, an emotional distance. And this is the one thing we do not wish for parents and children, to have an emotional distance between them, especially when children are very young. What they need is they need to be close to their parents, and parents need to feel close to their children. So this bond, this parent-child bond, is there is no more important bond. And so that is very important when that bond is threatened if parents do not share the same language as their children.